Hello guys, we're talking about another Toon Boom Animate Pro free tutorial, aren't we? Oh, love a duck, gore blimey, apples and pears. Now this week we're going to be talking about colour, and we're finally going to get to the root of what on earth these things mean. I know they've been tantalisingly taunting you all these weeks. Well, now we know. We will know what these mean. Let us create a character, and I'm sick of doing prince and princess. Let's do Toad. Alright, so we've got Toad here, and we'll, oh no, won't use red, I shall use black. And let's do black eyes, square pupil, because why not? And let's do a blobby face, and a couple of eyebrows, and a little chin. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to colour this thing in using blue. He's a blue toad. And I'm going to colour his eyes in using this thing, which is called green, even though it's dark blue. There we are. Now, he looks as if he's been out in the cold for some time, probably suffering from some kind of, blood failure and bladder failure, one too many gins. Well, there is a way of making him feel better. What we're going to do is we're going to select the colour for his skin and double click blue, and we're going to change the colour here, and you notice that the colour I change it to affects the colour that's filled in, because these are a bit misleading, these labels, as you may have gathered from this naughty little label here. I can do the same thing for here. If I change that to white, his eyes will now be a flush with a beautiful pale snow colour. These labels don't actually represent the colours at all. They represent what the colours stand for. So if I wanted to call that eye colour, I could actually do that. And if I wanted to call that colour skin, I could do that. And black, it would be better to call that line, really. And now you've got labels that actually mean something. They don't mean the colour, they mean what they actually do. Now, this is extremely useful because there are times when you might want to change your mind about a colour, and you might have drawn loads of things. Let's try just drawing another position of the toad here, he's vomiting from shock, and there we are. And I can paint his skin green. By the way, let's go to there and let's say fill close medium gap, because that's probably too big for it. Come on, 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 come on. No, that's too big for it there. Let's change that. Can we do it now? No? Oh. Come on! There we are. I can fill those in, and then I can make his eyes white. And I can do the interior of his mouth red, and I can do that. Now that looks as if it's just solid black, doesn't it? Well, it isn't, because that colour is different to that colour. Even though they're the same colour, they are different labels. So if I go here and I say I want his vomit to be orange, 'tis the colour of orange, I can do that. Again, that, even though it might be the same colour value as another one, it isn't. It is a different thing. And if I wanted to make his skin colour through both those frames different, I wanted to make him terminally ill again, I would be able to do that. It's a massively powerful feature, and it's so simple. That's one of the nice things about this. I'm just going to extend exposure there. So we've got our two positions for the vomiting toad. Sounds like one of Van Dyck's lesser known pictures. The Vomiting Toad, a masterpiece in oils. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to fiddle with this to tint it. Now, if anyone's used Flash before to use colours, I have to be honest, it wasn't the most pleasant thing to use for colour. Picking a colour out used to do this thing. I don't know whether it still does, but certainly the version of Flash I had, you used to use an eyedropper, and then the colour you would select would be ever so slightly off. So you'd have to make sure that your palette was absolutely correct, otherwise you'd add it. There wouldn't be any way of doing it. So you notice there, let me undo that. For vectorized line, or what should be called vomit, I should just retype that, not vommy. There we are, vomit. If I select that, the vomit is now orangey red. If I select that, yeah, that's because, oh, hang on. How interesting. It's clearly a different colour. Okay. Ah, here we are. Now this is an interesting little feature. It seems to have been sort of various variants of that colour if I wanted to. I actually want to make it exactly the same colour as that now, but if I wanted to change it. Oh, now that is interesting. You see, you learn something new every day. You see these sort of various tints. I can select the exact colour if I want, but I can also change the tint to be a slight variant. Now that's interesting. I shall look into that, but for the moment let's assume that I know what I'm talking about. The orange vomit tint. Now what I want to do is, say for example he was in the night, he was at night time, and in fact to give us more, set the scene a bit more, I'm going to create a colour card. Now why has it gone all Mondrian on this arse? Well, I'll tell you. Colour card, when it's selected, will show this just to show that it's being selected. These squares don't actually appear. See, when I unclick it, it disappears. But let's double click the colour card, and then I can change the background colour. Let's make it sort of dark blue here. Okay, close. So this isn't fillable, this is just, as far as I know, no it isn't. This is just a sort of its own layer, this is its own thing. This is kind of generally useful as a sort of starting point really, for most things. I wouldn't say it would be useful all the time. I'm just going to lock that now. Incidentally, you'll notice as well the colour card is on top of the toad layer and yet strangely behind it. Methinks another topic for another tutorial, but for the moment let's just say that the world works in the way that we expect it to, and the toad is on top of the colour card and everything is right with the world. Now I'm going to change the colour of his skin to green, and then if we have a look at both pictures we'll notice he's green. Now what I want to do is tint the whole thing so it's got a kind of bluey tint as if it's at night time. Now I'm just going to use this little doodly-doo. And here we see the palettes that are being used within this current project. And this one's called Tutorial because the scene is called Tutorial. I'll rename that and call it Toad. There we are. Now, if I want to tint him, you would think that I would take those colours and then manually sort of look at it and think, oh, okay, well, no, hang on, sorry, let's go there. I'll go, oh, okay, well, that's a sort of like, if I move it over there and do a bit of that, it's kind of, no. Fi, tish and tiddly-do, you don't need to do any of that. What you need to do is select the palette and clone it. And yeah, let's call it Toad Clone. Now what this does is that any changes you make to the clone will update on here. It won't update this palette, but it will update basically the colours that are referenced, shall we say, here will be changed the moment I use that. I say, I don't want to use you, I want to use you. I'll make it really clear. If I make on the clone layer this bright red, I can just select the palette, you see, and it's saying I now want to use this palette instead of this one, and it will do it. Let's go back though and assume that we want both the colours to be the same. Now with this clone, I will right click it and I'll go to the tint panel. And now we have on the clone palette a list of colours which we can tint. Now I'm going to select all of them. Can you do it that way? No. Okay, so you have to hold down Shift when you select all the colours that you want to tint. And then using Mixer, I think it is, I want the tint to be a kind of bluey colour. Now bear with me because I might get this wrong because I often do. Preview. Is that that? There we go. Now for some reason I don't know how it works, but the base has always got to be white for this to work. Yeah, I don't know how it works, but if I tint it then, you see I've made the tint colour blue and the base colour white, and then if I drag this from one to another, it will tint all of these values a kind of blue. So it still is green, but it's a bluey green, you know, and they're all in harmony with each other. So it is almost as if you've got a quality street wrapper and shoved it in front of your eye, and suddenly you've got this thing. And I'm going to apply. Now that makes the Toad clone layer tinted, but the original layer is still there. So I haven't destroyed anything. The way this reads palettes is that it tends to read the top one, the one at the very top, the first. So if I just move that up, these basically move palettes up and down. So if I move the clone up, it will read that and it won't default to the original colour. You know, you don't just select it and leave it. It tends to sort of say, I want the top one for some reason. So put it on the top. And there you have your Toad. And if you wanted to add colours, by the way, here's plus and minus. That should be fairly obvious. You press plus to add a new colour. You double tap the colour to change the colour. And you double tap the word to change the word. The word. Spelt in the old English way. The word. There we are. Interestingly, it's only appearing on the clone layer. Oh, that's an interesting little feature. I didn't know it would do that. But the values of the ones that have been used will still apply. So that is how colour works in this. And that's the first part of the tutorial. The other part is this. Let me get rid of the Toad layer completely. And we can keep the colour card actually. Let's create a new drawing. And I'm going to, for the purposes of this, use a textured brush because I think this will be more clear what I'm driving at. Now I'm going to create a little apple here. No, not a heart. An apple. There we go. And a little stalk and a leaf. And if I zoom in, you'll notice the texture is made of hundreds of tiny atoms. Now if I zoom out a bit, there we are. Now, if I want to fill this textured line in, you'll notice actually if I zoom right in, that there isn't really a definition to the outline of this. If I select it with the sort of object select tool, that's the definition right there. It's very clear. No, I'm not messing about. That's where your line is there. None of this poncy stuff. And if I select that and move that in, that also makes it very clear. Texture doesn't move with it. So, you know, it has its little, you know, little quirky things. You can move bits and pieces around, but once textured brushes are drawn, they're pretty much drawn. I don't know any way to manipulate that. You might be able to, I don't know it yet. You can twiddle, you can sort of bend things and stuff. Anyway, let's put it back. Now, if I'm trying to make a red apple, and I fill this in the conventional way, so I just say, oh, that's a shape, I will fill it, you get this hideous band here, which isn't the thing in civilized society. And if I were to do a leaf, also not the thing. So let's undo that. Oh dear, hang on a sec. Come on, come on, come on. There we are. Good computer. Now, what I want is the fill to kind of go in the center. so that this thing doesn't, doesn't look as if it's sort of bolted on. So what I'm going to do is selecting the red for that. You'll notice here, we're finally getting to it, these things. Now, you have to imagine that each of these layers has 4 sublayers. We've got the overlay art layer, the line art layer, the color layer, and the underlay. So imagine this is on the top and this is on the bottom. So you have 4 chances of putting something in the right order. So at the moment we've got line art on the line part of the drawing. Now, if I select that, we're now looking at the color art part. We're still seeing the line art, and it will be clearer to see what's going on using this. Now, this is another thing that might confuse people. We've got the camera view here, which we've always so far used to draw anything. And this is kind of like how Flash is, where you only see what the camera sees. If I just select camera mask, this is exactly what will render out at the very end. This is what the camera will take. I'll turn that off. And this is the camera layer, and you move things around. Now the drawing, if I look at the drawing panel, weird little bit of matrix goes on. I'm zooming out and zooming out. Where's the stage? It's because there is no stage. This is void. Void except all for one lone apple, which will save the world. This is the apple, and it's on the line art layer. Now if I press color, oh my God! All hope is lost. That's there. Now, this is the drawing. This has nothing to do with how the camera will see it or anything. This is just pure drawing layer stuff. And this is pretty much the only time, really, that I think it actually is useful. If we go back to the camera layer, and I select that, you'll notice that it's actually selected the lines. If I, in the camera window, select color art and I try to do it, I can't do it because I'm not actually on that kind of sub layer. So, can't do it. I select back on there, now I can do it. If I go to the drawing layer, it shows exactly what's visible. You see, this shows what the camera will see. It will still always see that, but I'm trying to manipulate the color art layer. See, and this only shows the layer that you can manipulate, see? So, using the color art layer, using the line art layer, what I'll do is, and this works either in the camera view or the drawing view, but let's do it for the drawing view. Selected all that drawing, right? And then I go to Tool Properties, and then I go here, which is the Create Color Art from Line Art button. And when I press that, what it should do is shove all the information, the line art information, from here to the next layer. So let's see what happens. And you'll notice as well, let's zoom in, we've got lines on either side. Once I go here, that's what's left. We're just left with the bounding boxes. Now this is, you don't see this is completely empty. If I turn off strokes, that is what the camera sees. It sees nothing. But when I turn on strokes, these are invisible lines that are just sort of boundaries for the fill tool. And you'll notice if I go backwards and forwards, if I just zoom in, if I go backwards and forwards, they're right dead center. This is the computer that's worked this out. Now if I use the fill tool on this, I go to red there, and I use green there. Now you see that's the line art layer, that's the color layer, line art color, please introduce you. Then I go to camera, and it's compiled the two. Now I'm just going to turn off strokes, and there we are. You see now it's right in the center. So we've got a much nicer filled object here. This isn't quite how it'll look when the finished render, because if you notice these cogs, you have this grey one which represents kind of, you know, dirty, let's get on with it sort of work, and then we've got this one which is highly polished and lovely but takes a long time to render. So if we press that, this will kind of act as a little, it's ready. And then this will show you exactly what the camera will see. So this is what the camera, when it renders out, will actually look like. Now, at the moment, the texture that, if I just go back to the working view, the texture of the line, actually I'll go back, oh, thank you autosave, ta! I go to the line art layer, instantly, look, ooh, line art different to colour art, beware, only do colouring when you're happy, unless you're doing it on the same layer, because you can colour on the same layer, but only working methods. Now, I don't know how to make a texture more obtuse except to select a different texture and to make sure that basically that colour won't come through. See, like that kind of thing. By working into the image more, or by, when you're in the tool properties of the paintbrush, selecting the texture, and if we just bring that up, oops, you can change the maximum opacity and sort of change that, and you probably have to select a different texture that's more dense so that you wouldn't get, hang on, sorry, that you wouldn't get this sort of line appearing here, but you can simply just work into it and then you've gotten rid of it. So, I mean, after all, this is the texture brush tool, which is a lot more painterly and lovely, so you're probably going to be wanting to work into it anyway, you know, and make it sort of like the snowman, you know, that sort of effect, where it looks like chalk or pencil. You know, it's up to you. But that is how these work, and that is the overlay art layer, which again is a different thing. If I go to the drawing section here, you'll notice that is its own thing, that's its own thing, that is its own thing, and that would be its own thing as well. Okay, so that is how colour works in Toon Boom.